Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are diving headfirst into a truly fascinating econometric study. We're going to uncover what actually drives Brazil's job market. And let me tell you, the data tells a story full of unexpected twists. You know, when we think about the economy, we usually picture this massive, incredibly complex machine. But what if that machine is actually controlled by just a tiny handful of really heavy levers? Today we are exploring a brilliant piece of research titled Is the Brazilian Labor Market Granular? By Leon Ascaro and Sergio da Silva. We are going to settle a massive, real-world battle between the Davids and the Goliaths of the economy. Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 2023, the Brazilian federal government established a dedicated ministry with a very specific goal: to strengthen the role of micro and small businesses in job creation. And honestly, looking at the millions of micro and small businesses out there, the Davids of our story, that makes total sense. They provide roughly 80% of all formal job opportunities in Brazil. 80%! That is a staggering majority. But a critical economic question emerges when we contrast this massive group with the heavy-hitting corporate giants. So, do these millions of small businesses actually drive the hiring and firing cycles? That's the central mystery of our explainer today. Because they hold 80% of the jobs, it feels incredibly intuitive to just assume that small businesses dictate the overall health of the nation. If the Davids are doing well, the economy does well. If they struggle, unemployment rises. That's the conventional wisdom, right? But what happens when we actually put this assumption under a rigorous mathematical microscope? Well, to find out, the researchers tested something known in economics as the granular hypothesis. To wrap our heads around the granular hypothesis, I want you to imagine a vast beach. The traditional economic view assumes this beach is made of fine, perfectly equal-sized grains of sand. If the wind blows, millions of grains shift slightly. Some move left, some move right, and ultimately these tiny individual movements just cancel each other out. The beach as a whole only changes shape if a massive, uniform wave hits the entire shore, like an aggregate economic shock. But the granular hypothesis says, actually no, that's not what the economy looks like at all. Instead of just fine sand, the beach is dominated by a few massive, heavy boulders. If something happens to just one of these massive boulders, an idiosyncratic shock specific to that one company, it causes a tremor so large that it reshapes the entire beach. And the millions of grains of sand, they literally cannot dilute or offset that impact. Now, what's really interesting here is the clear visual story when we look at formal job growth in Brazil over a 23-year period. You can see an overall upward trend over time, sure, but look closely at the path it takes. It doesn't travel in a straight, smooth line. It dips, it rises, it moves in these very distinct cyclical patterns of hiring and firing. So the researchers looked at this and asked, are these cycles caused by huge macroeconomic waves hitting the entire beach, or are they caused by a few giant boulders shifting their weight? To answer that, they had to determine what the Brazilian business landscape actually looks like mathematically. If firm sizes followed a normal distribution, kind of like the fine sand we just talked about, it would mean firms are relatively similar in size, and individual company shocks would just cancel each other out. But the data unequivocally proved otherwise. Brazilian firm sizes actually follow a power law distribution. Basically, you have an overwhelming number of small firms, but an extremely long tail of absolutely massive corporations. Because this power law exists, it means the Goliaths are entirely capable of dictating the market's pulse. And to prove this wasn't just some theoretical hunch, the researchers conducted an incredibly rigorous test. They didn't just take a quick snapshot, they pulled data from 1996 all the way to 2019 using the Brazilian Ministry of Labor's RAIS and CAGED databases. They isolated the top 1,000 largest companies in the country. And, to give their findings global context, they mirrored a pioneering study previously done on the German labor market. This allowed us to see exactly how Brazil's economic structure compares on the world stage. After running the numbers, the researchers arrived at this conclusion. And honestly, it is a blockbuster. Quote, the granular residual's explanatory power surpasses the labor market's firm representation percentage. Okay, let's translate that academic phrasing into plain English. It means they mathematically proved the granular hypothesis is absolutely true for Brazil. A tiny, microscopic fraction of massive firms are disproportionately yanking the levers of the entire job market. Even though they represent a tiny percentage of the total number of businesses, their specific corporate hiring and firing decisions ripple out and effectively steer the national cycles. The Goliaths are running the show. So if we know the massive boulders are steering the economic cycles, the obvious next question is, who are these giants? What industries do they belong to? I mean, when most of us think of a company large enough to single-handedly shift national employment figures, our minds immediately go to sprawling private manufacturing.
We picture endless assembly lines, immense automotive plants, or gigantic steel mills. It's almost an automatic assumption that big business automatically equals big manufacturing.
But here is where the data throws us a massive plot twist. Look at this comparison between Germany and Brazil. In the previous study of the German labor market, the top 100 manufacturing firms accounted for a very robust 14.7% of all jobs. They are major players. But in Brazil, the top 100 manufacturers account for a mere 1.5% of formal job positions. The researchers found that manufacturing in Brazil has almost zero explanatory power when it comes to hiring and firing cycles. To put that into perspective, the biggest Brazilian company in 1997 had about 23,000 employees, whereas Germany's largest had 62,000. Brazilian manufacturers are simply not the Goliaths driving the national economy.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why manufacturing isn't moving the needle. When we track manufacturing jobs as a percentage of total jobs in Brazil over time, notice how not only is the share incredibly small to begin with, but it has been on a steady, visible decline since 1995. You can't steer the vast cycles of a national economy when your overall share of the workforce is steadily shrinking. The researchers noted that the largest employers in the industrial sector just aren't big enough grains to cause a nationwide tremor.
So, we've totally debunked the manufacturing myth. We've established mathematically that the Davids, the 80%, aren't driving the cycles. And neither are the private factory giants. This leaves us with a gripping economic whodunit. If massive boulders are dictating the hiring and firing trends of the entire nation, and they aren't private manufacturers, who exactly are they? Well, to figure this out, the researchers had to calculate the precise granular size of the market.
To find the exact number of giant firms responsible for steering the economy, the researchers plotted a highly specific granular curve. Now, don't worry about the complex math behind the function here. Just focus on the point where the two curves intersect. You have a weighted curve based on firm size and an equal weight curve. The exact point where these two lines cross tells economists the precise number of grains that make up the absolute core of the market cycles.
So, the crucial point is 15. Literally, 15. That is the magic number. Out of millions of registered businesses across the entirety of Brazil, the hiring and firing cycles of the entire national labor market are fundamentally tied to the idiosyncratic shocks of just 15 massive corporations. This is the essence of the granular hypothesis brought to life. 15 Goliaths hold the steering wheel.
And here is the final remarkable twist of this explainer. When the researchers unmasked these 15 giants, they found they are not private enterprises at all. They are heavily linked to public services and the government. The scale here is breathtaking. The largest public company in their sample boasts an unbelievable 400,000 employees. Compare that to the largest private company, which has roughly 20,000 employees. When the researchers ran their models using only private companies, the statistical significance practically vanished. Private companies, even the big ones, have a minimal impact on the overall cyclical pulse of the country. It is the massive public service entities that are the true Goliaths. Now you might be wondering, so what does this all mean? This isn't just an abstract mathematical exercise. This data has profound, real-world implications for everyday economic policy. If we fundamentally misunderstand who is driving the labor market, we risk applying the wrong solutions to the most critical problems, like periods of high unemployment. By identifying the true structure of the market, this study invites a complete rethinking of how job creation is approached at a national level.
Let's move to how this builds a massive case for changing our policy perspectives. The traditional approach to combating unemployment, particularly during economic downturns, often relies on providing fiscal stimulus or tax policies aimed at private manufacturing, trying to jumpstart the factories to hire more people. But this study offers a compelling, data-driven alternative. The researchers conclude that because manufacturing has minimal impact on the hiring and firing cycles, and because the 15 true Goliaths are engaged in public services, addressing high unemployment might be more effectively achieved by shifting the focus of investment toward public services rather than private manufacturing stimulus.
It's a conclusion that completely flips conventional wisdom on its head. It forces us to ask, if just 15 publicly linked firms hold the keys to the entire nation's job cycles, how should leaders and policymakers reconsider fiscal stimulus and unemployment policies going forward? It's a highly provocative thought, and one that proves just how vital it is to look past the surface assumptions and dig into the granular data. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive in today's explainer. Keep questioning the data, and I'll catch you next time.